Welcome, and thank you for joining me. As the world outside quiets and you begin to settle into stillness, I invite you now to let your mind drift gently backwards through time. With every breath, let go of the noise of the present. There's no need to focus, just listen. Tonight, we journey to a place ancient beyond measure, a land shaped by wind, water, and sun, where time was marked not by clocks, but by the rhythm of the river and the turning of the stars. A land of deep beliefs, long dynasties, and endless sand. This is ancient Egypt, but not the Egypt of golden tombs and towering pyramids, at least not entirely. Instead, we'll walk slowly through the quiet spaces of the past, the sun-baked fields of the Nile Delta, the worn sandals of laborers, the sacred stillness of forgotten shrines. Our journey will unfold in 4 parts, each a window into a different face of this ancient world. First, we'll spend time in the daily life of a brickmaker, one of the many anonymous souls who helped build the very foundations of Egypt. Their work was exhausting, repetitive, and deeply physical, shaped by mud, sweat, and heat. You'll feel the weight of the sun on your back and the grit of sand in every breath. Next, we'll follow the curious path of one of Egypt's most unusual pharaohs, Akhenaten, the heretic king who turned against the old gods and tried to reshape an entire civilization around a single divine light. Then, we'll wander into a mystery. Together, we'll explore the hidden world of Egyptian burial practices, not just what we've seen in museums, but what has been uncovered by archaeologists and still debated today. Why were tombs booby-trapped? What secrets were meant to be kept? What haven't we yet understood? And finally, we'll enter the other side of Egyptian society, the private lives of the elite. Through the corridors of noble homes and under the shade of perfumed gardens, we'll explore how Egypt, as upper class, lived in contrast to the workers who supported them. So now, take a slow breath in. Let your thoughts soften. There is no need to remember names or facts. This is a gentle journey, not a test of memory, but a slow, soothing walk through time. Let's begin then, at the beginning, not with kings or gods, but with hands in the mud. Imagine the sky above you, a pale, cloudless canvas stretched wide over the Nile Valley. The morning sun is just beginning its slow climb. You're already awake. You sleep on a mat made from tightly woven reeds. The ground beneath it is hard-packed earth, cool and dry before the sun's heat begins to settle in for the day. Your house, if it can be called that, is made from the same mud bricks you help produce for temples, granaries, and workshops. Just a single room, maybe 2, a flat roof, a door hung with cloth instead of wood. The walls are thick to keep in whatever coolness the night has offered. The air smells faintly of ash, of last night's fire. You hear the shifting of feet, the soft murmurs of neighbors also waking, and the faint braying of a donkey somewhere nearby. Today, you will make bricks. This is your assignment, an obligation handed down through the village. In Egypt, every man owes his labor to the state at some point. The term is corvée, and for you, it means long days in the sun, helping construct something far larger than yourself. Walls for a storehouse, perhaps, or a distant shrine. You begin by walking to the edge of the river. Your tools simple: a scoop, a frame, your hands. The Nile is your life source. It gives food, water, and the mud that will soon form the bricks. You bend down and dig your fingers into the riverbank, lifting up the wet, heavy clay. It's thick, almost sticky, and it smells of silt and decay. Not unpleasant, just deeply earthy. You mix it with chopped straw, brought in by the bundle. This keeps the bricks from cracking as they dry. The work is rhythmic. You stir the mixture with your feet, walking in circles in the pit, like a slow, living pestle in a giant mortar. The straw scratches at your skin. Mud clings to your ankles. When it's ready, you take up a wooden mold. 2 hands wide, 1 hand deep. You press the mud mixture in, firm and steady, then lift. The new brick rests on the ground. You repeat this over and over for hours. There is little shade. The sun, though still young in the sky, already makes your skin tingle with heat. You wear a short linen kilt, coarse and stiff, the cloth wrapped once around your waist and tied in place. On your shoulders, nothing but sweat. Your skin darkens under the sun, dry in places, burned in others. Time is measured not by clocks, but by the height of the sun, by the movement of shadows, by the passing shouts of your overseer. Sometimes, when a breeze rolls off the river, there is relief, but mostly, the day crawls forward in heat and repetition. By midday, the sun stands high overhead. There is a break then, a pause in the worst of the heat. Some men sit in the shade of half-formed walls. Others lay their bodies flat against the ground, resting with arms over their faces. You take a date from your pouch. Its sweetness dulls the dryness in your mouth. You sip warm water from a goatskin bag. The taste is faintly sour, but it is enough. In the distance, a line of men hauls baskets of gravel. Another crew stacks dried bricks in tall piles. The overseer walks between groups, his reed stick tapping against his thigh. He doesn't need to shout. Everyone knows what is expected. You think sometimes of your wife. She is back in the village. She rises early, too, grinding grain on a stone slab, her arms strong from years of repetition. She will bake flatbread, care for the children, sweep out the dust that always returns. Life is labor, for her as much as for you. Evening brings its own rhythm. The sky softens, turning a hazy gold, then rose. The wind picks up just slightly, lifting the edge of your linen wrap. You clean your tools, rinse your arms in a basin, and begin the walk home. There is little talking. The men are tired, too tired for gossip. You nod as you pass the homes of others, then duck inside your own. The air is warmer inside, but quiet. A small fire flickers in the corner. The smell of lentils and garlic fills the room. You eat slowly. You sit on the floor. You stretch out on the mat, your body stiff, but used to it. You don't think much about the future. You don't question the structure of life. There is only today and tomorrow, and the day after that. You sleep deeply. No blankets, no ceremony. The day has taken everything from your body, and in exchange it gives you rest. And in the morning, the rhythm will begin again. The sun will rise. The mud will wait. The bricks will dry. This is Egypt. Not the Egypt of myth or miracle, but the Egypt that stood on strong backs and calloused hands. An Egypt that survived through sweat and routine and the constancy of the sun. Let us now leave the muddy riverbanks and climb upward into the halls of power, into the world of palaces, temples, and royal decrees. The name Akhenaten may not be the first to rise in your mind when you think of Egypt. His face, if you've seen it carved in stone, looks strange, long and narrow, almost androgynous. His name was nearly erased from history by those who came after him. But for a brief span of years in the 14th century BCE, Akhenaten ruled Egypt, and in doing so, he tried to upend thousands of years of belief, tradition, and political structure. Before he was Akhenaten, he was Amenhotep IV, son of Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye. His family was powerful, wealthy, and deeply embedded in the traditions of the time. Egypt then was at its peak. Grand temples to Amun lined the Nile. Priests held enormous power, and the old gods of Egypt, Ra, Osiris, Isis, Thoth, were worshipped in every corner of the land. But Amenhotep IV had other ideas. He was enthralled with one god in particular, the Aten, the disk of the sun itself, not the sun as a being, no hawk-headed god, no mythology, but the literal presence of sunlight, radiant and life-giving. He renamed himself Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, and more than that, he declared that all other gods were false. Imagine, for a moment, what that would have meant. Imagine a world where belief is not separate from state, where temples are not just places of worship, but economic powerhouses, employers, granaries, banks. To eliminate the gods was to remove their priests, to close their temples, to cut away the structure that underpinned society. Akhenaten didn't simply change religious policy, he changed the landscape of Egypt. He built a new capital city from scratch, Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten. You may know it today by the name Amarna. Located in the central desert, far from the old cities, it was laid out quickly and deliberately. Houses were built, palaces, workshops, temples, open to the sky, because the Aten, the sun disk, was to be worshipped under open air, where its rays could fall directly on the faithful. In art, the change was immediate and startling. Gone were the rigid, idealized forms of earlier pharaohs. Akhenaten's statues showed him with elongated limbs, heavy eyelids, narrow waists. He is often shown with his queen, Nefertiti, and their daughters, shown not in formal poses, but in intimate moments, kissing children, sitting in casual posture. Above them all, the Aten shines down, its rays ending in small, delicate hands. It was beautiful, in a way, but it was also radical. The priests of Amun, now sidelined, must have seethed in silence. The common people, accustomed to rituals, gods with animal heads, funerary rites involving Osiris, were now expected to offer praise to a shining disk they could not touch. Festivals changed, offerings changed, prayers changed, and all of it came from the mouth of one man, Akhenaten, who styled himself not just as king, but as the sole intermediary between his people and their god. This revolution did not last long. After less than 2 decades, Akhenaten died. Some believe he was succeeded briefly by his mysterious son-in-law, Smenkhkare. Others argue he died without strong heirs. But what is known is this: within a few years, a young boy took the throne, Tutankhaten, later renamed Tutankhamun, and under his advisors, Egypt began to revert. The temples to Amun were reopened. The new capital was abandoned, left to crumble in the desert. Statues of Akhenaten were defaced. His name was scratched from monuments. His legacy deliberately forgotten. And yet, the city he built remained buried in sand until modern times. When archaeologists uncovered Amarna, they found traces of a dream, a vision of a different Egypt, not one ruled by many gods, but by light itself. It is tempting to view Akhenaten as a visionary, a monotheist before monotheism, a philosopher king. but to live under his rule. That would have been confusing, unsettling, and perhaps dangerous. To survive his revolution would mean letting go of everything you believed, the gods of your ancestors, the rituals for your dead, the temple festivals and familiar prayers. You would be expected to follow the sunlight, but never quite see what it meant. This was Akhenaten's Egypt, brief, strange, and swallowed again by sand. And now, let us step away from the world of kings and prophets and toward something older still, a mystery buried beneath stone, a secret not yet fully understood. As the hot wind softens and the shadows lengthen across the desert sands, let your mind settle now into the stillness beneath the earth, where time moves slowly and voices are silent. We descend now into the limestone cliffs, into the Valley of the Kings and other sacred burial grounds, scattered along the Nile's western edge. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, but a deeply prepared for journey, a passage, a return. And nowhere was this belief more deeply inscribed than in the tombs of the powerful. Imagine walking by torchlight down a narrow corridor cut deep into rock. The air is dry and close. The walls are painted, bright, orderly, covered in thousands of symbols, hieroglyphs winding like poetry, scenes depicting gods and judgment, fields of reeds and sacred boats drifting upon celestial waters. This is no crude grave. This is a crafted vessel for eternity. But for all their beauty and symmetry, these tombs were also puzzles, riddles, systems of spiritual architecture, and at times, physical defense. Let's begin with a mystery that has fascinated generations. Why were so many royal tombs hidden? And how did they intend to keep them sealed forever? By the New Kingdom period, pharaohs no longer built pyramids as their final resting places. The conspicuous grandeur of the Pyramid Age had given way to discretion. The Valley of the Kings, nestled between arid cliffs and winding wadis, became the preferred royal necropolis, its natural isolation, ideal for secrecy. But secrecy was not enough. Architects experimented with decoy chambers, blind passages, and deep vertical shafts to confuse intruders. Some tombs, like that of Seti I, descend layer after layer, hundreds of feet into the mountain, their complexity increasing with each turn. Builders embedded symbolic barriers as well, walls of stone or plaster, painted or carved with warnings. The infamous curses that later legends would sensationalize were not spells in a modern sense, but prayers, warnings, and invocations, designed to protect the soul of the deceased and ward off desecration. Yet, for all this care, most of the tombs were robbed, often within a generation of burial. Imagine, for a moment, the irony. A pharaoh might spend decades planning his eternal home, stocked with golden sarcophagi, alabaster vessels, food, linens, even boats carved from cedar. And then, after just a few seasons, looters, sometimes insiders, might pry open the stone doors and carry the treasures out under cover of darkness. But not always. There was one tomb that survived nearly untouched, one that remained hidden beneath rubble for over 3,000 years. You know his name, Tutankhamun. In 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter, after years of tireless searching, discovered the sealed entrance. What lay beyond was beyond anyone's imagination, a treasury of objects, thrones, chariots, ceremonial beds, the iconic golden mask, but more than gold. It was a time capsule, a near-perfect snapshot of what a royal burial looked like. unspoiled by grave robbers or time. And yet, for all its glamour, King Tut's tomb was modest compared to those of greater rulers. His death, perhaps unexpected, meant less time to prepare. His story, largely forgotten until it was unearthed in modern times. But the mysteries do not end with the kings. Across the river, in tombs far less ornate, lie the workers, the very people who carved these subterranean palaces. In Deir el Medina, the village of tomb builders, archaeologists have found graffiti, private letters, tiny ostraca with personal sketches. They lived, worked, and died alongside these monuments, their own graves often within sight of the larger ones they built. In their own way, they left riddles too, scraps of poetry, half-finished carvings, lists of provisions, complaints to supervisors, even records of strikes, the first known labor strikes in history. From kings to craftsmen, the tomb was a promise, a final resting place where the soul might journey forward, provided the body remained undisturbed and the name remembered. And now, the tombs are silent again. Torchlight flickers on painted walls. Dust settles on the ancient floors. And the dead, once again, are at rest. Let us rise now, gently, leaving the tomb behind, and walk quietly into another kind of Egypt, one above the sand, where the elite dined on figs and honey, where music floated across garden pools, and the Nile's breeze stirred lotus blossoms in the twilight. Now, imagine the golden sunlight again, not harsh this time, but softened by palm fronds and linen awnings. Imagine the breeze off the Nile, drifting into a wide courtyard, shaded by sycamore trees. You are not a laborer, nor a servant, nor a builder of tombs. You are someone else entirely. You are a noble, perhaps a high priest, a scribe in favor with the court, or the wife of a wealthy landowner. And this is your Egypt. Step gently now into a villa on the outskirts of Thebes. The walls are painted in soft colors, blue for the river, ochre for the hearth, and green for the fields. Each room is spare, open, calm. Furniture is low to the ground, woven of reeds or carved from acacia wood, polished smooth by time and hands. The air smells of myrrh and frankincense. In a corner, someone grinds fresh ochre into pigment. In another, a servant pours cool water from a decorated clay vessel into a cup of polished alabaster. Outside, the garden is symmetrical and deliberate. A central pool reflects the sun. Lotus blossoms open in the warmth. Ducks paddle lazily. Trees, date palms, pomegranate, sycamore, and fig line the path. Birds call gently from the branches. A gardener tends the plants in silence, his motions unhurried. Daily life for the elite is carefully ordered. Ritual, beauty, and leisure are tightly interwoven. In the morning, you may be found at the temple, offering incense to the gods, attending a ritual, or reading from sacred texts in a scriptorium. Education for the wealthy is a matter of pride. You read hieroglyphs and hieratic script. You understand the calendar. You speak with deference, but write with authority. After duties are complete, there is time for music. The harp, the lute, flutes carved from reed and bone. Servants play softly as guests recline on cushioned benches. You sip wine flavored with herbs, sweetened with honey, and then comes the feast. Laid before you, roasted duck and quail, grilled fish from the Nile, loaves of bread shaped like birds and flowers, lentils, chickpeas, cucumbers, dates and figs, pastries with honey, wine cooled in jars sunk into the earth. You do not eat quickly. You eat with ceremony, with laughter, soft conversation, and gestures of etiquette. A scribe may recite a poem. A priest may speak of dreams and omens. The hours stretch like the shadows, long and golden. But even among the wealthy, there is always the undercurrent of eternity. Your tomb is already being planned, your name already written in prayers. Your Shabdi figures, miniature servants for the afterlife, are being sculpted one by one. You commission a stele for your courtyard, etched with your life's deeds, your lineage, your offerings to the gods. And when you walk along the river, at sunset, dressed in linen robes, perfumed with kifi, you do so knowing that you are walking the same path as your ancestors, that each day of beauty is a link in a chain, stretching back to the time of Ra and forward into the unknown. Elite life in Egypt is not about indulgence for its own sake. It is a ritualized peace, a quiet pride, a sense that one's place in the world is fixed, purposeful, and eternal. The sun begins to dip now behind the western hills, the land of the dead. You retreat to the cool of your villa. The oil lamps are lit. The harp plays one final melody, and the hush of night settles like linen across the land. Let us now gently leave this place. Let us step out of this ancient world and return, slowly, quietly, to our own. In a moment, I'll offer a closing reflection to ease you further toward rest. But for now, simply breathe and let the silence of Egypt hold you. As we leave the sands of ancient Egypt behind, let your breath soften. Let the golden dust settle. The sounds of the Nile fade into silence, and a new horizon begins to form. One shaped not by desert, but by mist-covered mountains, winding rice paddies, and wooden homes nestled beside quiet streams. Time turns. Like a wheel, we now step into a different world, gentle, austere, and balanced in its own quiet rhythm. A land of seasons and soil, of order and duty, where honor was worn like armor, even by those with bare feet and calloused hands. You are no longer reclining in a painted villa. You are barefoot in a field. The sun is softer, but the struggle is not. Welcome to feudal Japan, a place where the sword ruled from afar, but the peasant's life turned on the pull of the harvest, the patience of the rains, and the strength of the back. And now, with quiet curiosity, let us begin again. Settle in. Let the tension in your shoulders release. Let your breath fall into rhythm, like a soft wind stirring the tops of tall rice plants. You're about to travel far from this world to a time and place where days began before the sun rose, where the seasons ruled more strictly than any emperor, and where the life of a simple peasant was a quiet story of patience, endurance, and dignity. Welcome to feudal Japan. From the 12th century onward, Japan entered a long and intricate period of samurai rule, imperial shadows, and tightly structured social hierarchies. But while the lords and warriors captured the scrolls of history, most people, nearly 90%, lived not in castles, but in small wooden homes, tucked between fields and forests. And it is their story we tell tonight. This is not the tale of heroic battles or legendary swords. This is the tale of cold water on calloused hands, of wooden sandals pressed into damp soil, of silent mornings beneath the mountain mist, and the unspoken pride of a life lived in rhythm with the earth. Over the next 2 hours, we'll gently walk through 4 facets of life in this quiet, rigid world. First, We will place you directly into the straw sandals of a medieval Japanese peasant, exploring a full day from sunrise to rest, from planting to tax collection, from winter hunger to summer floods. Then, we'll turn our attention to a remarkable historical figure, an outcast who rose from the dirt to challenge a society built to keep him down. From there, we'll follow the silent clues left by time: pottery shards, hidden inscriptions, forgotten village rituals, all revealing the subtle mysteries of rural Japanese life. And finally, we'll peer into the lives of those above, the daimyos and samurai lords, whose power and privilege defined a world our peasants could only watch from a distance. Let this be a quiet unfolding. No battles, no grand drama, just the soft texture of real lives. Layered, limited, yet filled with meaning. Now, let's begin where all stories in this world began, in a small wooden home with a thatched roof, nestled against the edge of a rice paddy. You wake to the sound of crows, to the smell of damp earth, to another day beneath the rising sun of feudal Japan. The light comes gently, filtered through thin paper screens. There is no clock, but you do not need one. You rise with the sun, because that is how it has always been. Your home is made of wood and wattle, with a thatched roof and a floor that creaks in the cold. The walls are thin. In winter, the wind whispers through the cracks. In summer, the insects hum just beyond the screens. You lie on a straw mat. It is not soft, but it is familiar. Your body aches, not sharply, but deeply, as it always does. You dress quietly, in simple hemp clothing. The fabric is coarse, woven by hand. Your sleeves are tied up with a strip of cloth. Your feet slide into worn sandals. Your tools are already waiting, wooden, iron-tipped, shaped by generations of hands. You are a hyakusho, a peasant farmer. Your land is not truly your own. It belongs to the local daimyo, or to a temple, or perhaps to a distant noble whose name you may not know. You do not own the soil you till, but you are bound to it more tightly than any scroll could declare. Outdoors, the morning air is heavy with dew. Mist clings to the ridges of the nearby hills. A narrow path winds through the village, where other homes, just like yours, line the shallow stream. The day begins, not with conversation, but motion. You join your family in the fields. The rice seedlings are fragile, vibrant green. You bend low to the water's surface, planting each stalk by hand. The mud is cold at first, then warm. You work by rhythm: foot, step, press, plant. Again, again, a steady, ancient beat. There are no breaks, only pauses. By mid-morning, the sun burns off the mist. The fields shimmer. You swat at gnats, wipe your forehead with the inside of your sleeve. A sip of barley tea, a handful of rice or millet from a small cloth bundle. Quiet chewing, quiet chewing. Your children work alongside you. There is no school today, only planting season. School is for sons of samurai, for priests and scribes. You learn from hands and repetition, from your mother's calm instruction, from your father's silence. As the day stretches, so do your muscles. You pull weeds, repair a broken tool, restack a collapsed ridge in the irrigation channel with smooth, practiced movements. But there are other obligations too. A tax collector may arrive. He wears fine robes, carries scrolls and seals. You bow. Your rice, measured out in sheaves or bushels, is handed over. You give what you must, and sometimes more. Refusal is not an option. Fairness is not guaranteed. Sometimes, There are levies in labor instead. You are sent to repair roads, build a fence, or serve a few days at the Lord's estate, hauling water, carrying goods, never meeting his gaze. The weight of the day rests not just in your arms, but in your thoughts. The harvest is still months away. If the rains come too early or too late, there will be hunger again. Still, there are quiet moments. At dusk, the sky turns soft, orange, then pink, then gray. The frogs begin their chorus in the flooded paddies. You return home with tired legs and dirty sleeves. Inside, your wife stirs miso soup, a few pickled vegetables, rice if there's enough. You eat slowly. It is not much, but it is warm. Afterward, you sit near the small hearth, watching the smoke twist into the rafters. Someone hums. A child dozes against your shoulder. The room is dim. You do not speak much, but there is peace in the stillness. Tomorrow will come early again, and so will the seasons, and so will the years. Your life may never change, but it is not meaningless. In every stalk of rice, every weed pulled, every moment endured, you are part of something larger, a rhythm older than memory, a world of quiet labor and quiet resilience. Sleep comes easily here, and the fields are waiting. Imagine being born into nothing. No title, no land, no surname of significance, only dirt beneath your feet, and the distant sound of swords clashing in a world far above your reach. Such was the beginning of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a name that would come to echo across the entirety of Japan. But at birth, around the year 1537, he was known simply as Hayoshimaru, a peasant child in a time of relentless warfare. This was the Sengoku period, an age of constant strife. Lords battled for land, castles rose and fell, and entire provinces changed hands overnight. For most, such chaos only deepened their poverty, but for one boy with quick wits and quicker hands, it created a narrow crack in the walls of Japan's rigid social order. Hideyoshi's early life is still somewhat shrouded in mystery. Historians cannot say for certain where he was born. Perhaps Owari province. His father was a foot soldier, low-ranking and poorly paid. After his father's death, Hideyoshi likely wandered in search of purpose, or simply survival. As a young man, he found his way to the service of a powerful daimyo, Oda Nobunaga, a fierce and ambitious leader with little regard for tradition. Nobunaga valued talent over birth, and in Hideyoshi, he found both. First, Hideyoshi carried sandals. Then, he managed supplies. Soon, he coordinated entire campaigns. He was not a warrior in the traditional sense, not in his early years. He was clever, diplomatic, observant. He understood logistics, how to win loyalty, how to move men and resources quietly, effectively. In one campaign, when Nobunaga's army was stalled by a lack of supplies, it was Hideyoshi who organized the transport of provisions over treacherous terrain, an act that saved the campaign and earned him a promotion. From there, the peasant's son became a general. He led sieges, constructed castles, negotiated with rival clans. He was tireless, and perhaps more importantly, adaptable. When Nobunaga was assassinated in 1582, many assumed the Oda clan would fall apart. But Hideyoshi moved swiftly, decisively, and with quiet brilliance. He avenged his lord's death and outmaneuvered his rivals. Within a few years, Hideyoshi held more power than any man in Japan. He could not become shogun. His birth made that impossible. But he accepted the title Kampaku, or imperial regent. and later taiko, or retired regent. He wore court robes, built palaces, hosted poetry contests. But he never forgot where he came from. His laws, while harsh, often sought to stabilize the countryside, limiting the power of samurai, redistributing land, enforcing order after generations of war. He conducted a great sword hunt, removing weapons from peasants, not in cruelty, but in a desperate bid to ensure peace. He also launched invasions of Korea, ambitious, brutal campaigns that ultimately failed. And near the end of his life, he grew increasingly paranoid, attempting to solidify his young son's succession. When he died in 1598, the peace he had built was fragile, but his legacy was already written. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a man born in a farmer's hut, rose to become the second great unifier of Japan. In a society that rarely allowed movement between classes, he had done the impossible, not through blood or wealth or war alone, but through strategy, patience, and an unshakable will. His story is not a fairy tale. It is a ripple in still water, a reminder that even in the most structured worlds, a single life can bend the course of history. Let your mind drift now, away from names and battles, into the soft quiet of a wooden home, weathered by wind and season. In feudal Japan, the minka, literally houses of the people, were not simply shelters. They were living spaces shaped by centuries of ritual, custom, climate, and quiet belief. At first glance, a minka seems humble. Its walls are made of earth and wood. Its floor is raised slightly above the ground to protect against moisture. Its roof is thick and heavy, often steeply pitched to withstand snow or rain, thatched with layers of straw or wooden shingles. But every element of this structure tells a story, and within those stories are echoes of deeper things. The minka was not just a physical space. It was a reflection of balance between human and nature, between utility and spirit. At the heart of the minka lies the irori, a sunken hearth. Here, meals are cooked, light is shared, smoke rises slowly through the open rafters, darkening the beams over years, decades, even generations. That smoke serves a purpose. It preserves the thatch, repels insects, and wraps the home in a scent both pungent and familiar. Above the irori hangs a jizaikagi, an adjustable hook shaped like a fish or other animal, used to suspend a kettle over the flame. The fish was not chosen at random. Fish were believed to ward off fire, a symbolic safeguard against a peasant's greatest domestic fear. And there were other beliefs too. Doors were placed deliberately. Roofs were aligned carefully with seasonal winds. And often, in some corner of the house, a kamidana, a shelf for the household deity, rested with quiet offerings, a sprig of rice, a few grains of salt, a folded piece of paper. It was said that kami, or spirits, lived not only in shrines, but in rivers, rocks, and even the hearth itself. To live in harmony with nature meant more than survival. It meant acknowledgement, gratitude, caution. Excavations of old village sites have uncovered surprising uniformity. Common layouts, shared dimensions, local adaptations based on climate. Yet within these patterns, every minka held its own signature. Variations in window placement, clay mix, or the curve of the beams. A kind of rural handwriting. These homes were rarely built by architects, but by the hands of villagers, carpenters, and neighbors. Knowledge was passed by doing, by watching, and repeating. A hammer, passed from father to son, a ridgepole set in place with quiet ceremony. Some archaeologists believe that certain corners of the house were designated inauspicious, a space where no one sat, no tools were stored, and no offerings were made. A silent acknowledgement of something felt, not spoken. Other spaces were communal, where neighbors gathered during festivals, shared fermented drinks, and traded stories older than memory. And in some Minka, carvings of protective deities were hidden in the rafters, not to be seen, only to be known. In these simple structures, we find a tapestry of function and faith, a record not written in ink, but in timber and earth. And in that quiet, resilient architecture, we are reminded of the values that shaped rural Japan: endurance, respect, and the seamless weaving of the sacred into the everyday. You may never see a Minka in person, but now, perhaps, you can feel one, warm from the hearth, soft with smoke, quiet with years. Now, allow yourself to shift once more from the smoke-darkened beams of a peasant's farmhouse to the polished silence of the daimyo's estate. You move through gravel paths, raked to careful symmetry, beneath sloped tile roofs that shimmer faintly in the morning mist. The estate is not ostentatious, not by modern standards. It is composed, measured, balanced. This is not a place for impulse or noise. Here lived the daimyo, the feudal lords of Japan, powerful, autonomous, and fiercely loyal to their shogunate, or, in more turbulent times, to none but themselves. But power here is not loud. It is refined, expressed not in gold or excess, but in order. To serve a daimyo was to live by the clock of ceremony. From the earliest hour, retainers would rise, robes adjusted with precision, hair tied, blades sharpened, and placed just so. Every movement, whether bowing, speaking, or even walking, was informed by rank and tradition. In his private quarters, the daimyo's world was one of quiet control. His days might begin with correspondence, scrolls written on fine washi paper, marked with family crests and flowing calligraphy. A scribe would kneel respectfully, awaiting dictation. Each message bore not only words, but implication, nuance, and layers of diplomacy. Meals were sparse but elegant, served in seasonal lacquerware, never excessive, always intentional. The elite palate valued simplicity: rice, pickled vegetables, grilled river fish, and perhaps a rare delicacy of plum or seaweed folded in vinegar. Tea, of course, was central. The chanoyu, or tea ceremony, was a cornerstone of elite culture. It was not merely drinking, it was performance. The way the tea was stirred, the order of steps, the placement of the bowl. Every action was codified, rehearsed, and deeply symbolic. A daimyo would host or attend such gatherings not for leisure, but to maintain alliances, assert refinement, and signal authority through grace. And then, there were audiences. Lesser samurai would present petitions. Artists might be summoned to recite poetry. Messengers arrived with tidings from Kyoto or Edo. When the daimyo moved, whether to inspect lands or travel for sankin kotai, the mandatory attendance system requiring daimyo to spend alternating years in the capital, he did so with a vast retinue, carriages lacquered black, banners held aloft, hundreds of attendants marching in practiced silence. Yet beneath the pageantry, life for the daimyo was tightly bound. He was constantly watched, not only by his own retainers, but by the shogunate. His heirs were hostages in Edo. His every decision, gesture, or alliance scrutinized for hints of rebellion. Even within his estate, he was surrounded by formal gardens, arranged not for beauty alone, but for message, metaphors of longevity, wisdom, and humility shaped in rock and moss. The luxury was real, but it came at the cost of privacy, spontaneity, and even trust. While the peasant faced the hardship of weather and harvest, the daimyo lived in a house of glass expectations, always poised, never fully free. And yet, many of them believed in this order, because in its rigidity, it promised continuity, a system where every piece knew its place, where each morning began with bows, and each evening ended in quiet routine. You can imagine it now, the estate settling into dusk, tatami mats cool beneath slippered feet, a single flute playing in some distant room, and the daimyo, seated before a screen of ink-painted pine, hands resting lightly on his knees, preparing to receive one more guest. And now, as the paper walls of the estate slide shut behind us, as the lanterns dim and the rituals of the daimyo's world fade into silence, let us leave the stillness of the garden path and set our course for something altogether different, far from the quiet valleys of feudal Japan, across vast oceans and uncertain tides, awaits a very different rhythm. No tatami beneath your feet, only worn planks slick with seawater, no measured bows or ritual tea, just the relentless creak of timber, the roar of wind, and the endless gray of the open sea. You're about to step aboard a 19th century whaling vessel, not as a guest, but as a common hand. Gone are the comforts of ceremony and order. Here, it's salt in your eyes, blisters on your palms, and a job that could drag you halfway around the world and back again, if you're lucky. The air is thick with the scent of oil, sweat, and brine. The danger? Constant. The routine? Grueling. The rewards? Rare. So settle in as we set sail into a life you were never meant to endure. This is why you wouldn't last a day on a 19th century whaling ship. As you close your eyes and drift towards sleep, let your mind journey far from the softness of your bed to a place that was anything but restful. The year is 1843. You're no longer on solid ground, but aboard a ship, rough-hewn, heaving with the waves, a floating factory of danger, discipline, and darkness. You've signed your name in ink, your mark beside others on the crew list, and now you're no longer simply a passenger in history. You're a hand aboard a whaling vessel, bound for oceans cold and wild. This is not the romance of tall ships, not the golden glow of nostalgia. This is the real thing. Long months at sea, back-breaking labor, hard biscuit and salt pork, and a constant, gnawing question. Will we find a whale before we run out of food? Tonight, in this quiet moment, we'll drift through the truth of that life. Slowly, gently, and in full. We'll begin with the harsh daily routines of a common sailor before shifting into the lives of those who led and those who perished. We'll peer into the mysteries that surrounded these voyages, from shipwrecks and ghost stories to floating bones and vanished ships. And finally, we'll contrast the suffering of the common hand with the odd comforts and coded rituals of the captain's quarters. So breathe deeply. Let the salt air rise in your mind. The planks creak. The sails strain. You're no longer on land. You're at sea. And this is why you wouldn't last a day on a 19th century whaling ship. Imagine yourself here, cramped in the bowels of a wooden ship, It's still dark outside, but someone is already yelling. You wake on a narrow bunk, just inches above another sailor, the air heavy with damp wool, sweat, and mildew. You've slept in the same clothes you worked in yesterday, and the day before that. There is no bathroom, no privacy, just a slop bucket and the constant smell of tallow, tobacco, and tar. You haul yourself upright as the bell sounds. Your feet hit the slick, uneven floor of the forecastle. Your back aches. Your hands are still raw from yesterday's line work. On deck, the wind hits you like a slap, cold, relentless. Salt stings your cheeks as a wave breaks over the rail. You get to work. It doesn't matter that it's raining. It doesn't matter that you're tired. The sails need trimming. The deck needs swabbing. The ropes are wet and rough, and your fingers bleed through their calluses. You're fed twice a day. Salted pork, hard biscuit, maybe beans. The biscuit is full of weevils. You learn to tap it on the table, to knock them out. If you're lucky, the cook boiled something in leftover whale oil. If not, you chew and keep going. Your watch shifts vary, 4 hours on, 4 off. But sleep comes hard, rocked by the motion of the sea, with creaking timbers, stomping boots, and men groaning in their dreams. There's no such thing as stillness on this ship, only constant motion and waiting for a sighting, a spray on the horizon, a plume of breath from a whale's back. And when that call comes, thar she blows. Everything changes. There's no hesitation. You drop what you're doing. You sprint to the boats, oars ready. The chase begins, and the real danger follows. But that is for later. For now you return below. Another knot to tie, another hour to pass, another aching muscle, another bruised knee, another moment wondering, why did I ever sign on? And the answer, for most, was simple. You were broke, you were desperate, and whaling paid if you survived. But even then, most saw nothing but debt and disappointment, years lost to the sea, and no glory, only salt, only cold, only the endless, aching gray of the horizon. Let your thoughts drift now to the gray Atlantic of the early 1800s, Nantucket, Massachusetts, a small island with a mighty industry, whaling. The Essex was not a new ship, but she was seaworthy, and in 1819 she was set to sail once again, bound for the Pacific. Her captain was George Pollard, Jr., just 29 years old, but well respected. By his side, First Mate Owen Chase, practical, bold, and ambitious. They boarded with 20 others, young, often poor, hoping to return years later with profit in their pockets. The Essex left harbor, sailed south, around Cape Horn, and into the vast Pacific, hunting whales. The days were long, the work brutal. Men lowered into small boats, chased giants, harpooned them, and rendered their blubber into oil, right there on deck. Then came November 20th, 1820. A calm day, open sea, and a whale appeared. But it didn't dive. It turned and charged. The men watched, frozen, as the creature struck. Once, then again. The Essex groaned, splintered, and began to sink. There was no time to grieve the ship, only time to grab what they could, climb into small boats, and push away from the wreck. They were alone, no land in sight, thousands of miles from the South American coast. Captain Pollard urged them to head for the Marquesas. So instead, they sailed east, a longer journey, with less hope. Days passed, then weeks. The sun blistered their skin. Rain was rare. Food vanished. Men began to die, quietly, one by one. Eventually, they drew lots, a system to decide who would live and who would feed the others. Even Captain Pollard lost his cousin that way. The boy's life taken for survival. It's a moment that haunted Pollard forever. After more than 90 days at sea, 2 boats were finally rescued. Others were lost. One boat vanished completely. Pollard returned to Nantucket, but never captained again. He lived a quiet life, a man unmade by the sea. Owen Chase published a memoir. He tried to carry on. Years later, a young writer named Herman Melville read Chase's account. He visited Pollard, listened quietly, and from those memories grew Moby Dick. But long before it became fiction, the Essex was fact. A tragedy, an unraveling, a slow, steady descent into desperation and quiet survival. Now, the Essex rests somewhere deep beneath the Pacific. The whale is long gone, but the story remains. A reminder of what waits beyond the horizon. Not just danger, but decisions no man should have to make. As the Essex disappeared beneath the Pacific, its story didn't sink with it. Instead, pieces of that world drifted onward, quietly, persistently. One of the most personal remnants was scrimshaw. Whalebone, teeth, and ivory became canvases for idle hands. Sailors etched with needles, carving ships, memories, or loved ones. They rubbed soot, ink, or tobacco into the grooves. The images emerged, dark against pale bone, scenes of ports, sea battles, or imaginary women, gazed out from the surface. Today, they sit under glass in quiet museum rooms. Each one holds a fragment of a vanished life. Tools, too, survived the sea. Rusted harpoon heads have been pulled from whale skeletons. Knives used for flensing lie, buried on forgotten beaches. Iron hooks and pulley rings wash ashore after a storm. In rare cases, full boats were found adrift, oars resting inside, sails tattered, no crew aboard. A quiet testament to the danger and isolation of whaling. And then, the bones. A whale's skeleton could stretch longer than a house. Its rib cage, once a cage of breath, now frames a village archway. In Arctic settlements, whale bones became rafters and fences. In Greenland, jawbones formed ceremonial gateways. The whale became shelter. The tale of the Essex became one such story, passed from mouth to mouth, from logbook to literature. Herman Melville found inspiration in its scattered truths. From these fragments, he built Moby Dick, a novel, yes, but also an echo of real desperation. The whale became more than animal. It became symbol, a god, a ghost, a force of nature. Sailors spoke of it with reverence and fear. Its vast eye, its power, its silence, all haunted the edge of human understanding. For some, the whale meant survival. And still, it endures in memory. Scrimshaw passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. Tools rust quietly in coastal sheds. Yet each artifact hums faintly with its past. The sea forgets slowly. It carries whispers longer than it carries ships. Even in modern oceans, sperm whales roam as they once did. They dive deep, far from human reach. Some scientists believe they remember boat sounds. They are survivors, descendants of giants once hunted, and in their wake, stories rise like foam. We look to the sea and imagine the bones below. The ones who returned, and the ones who didn't. A rusted harpoon, a carved tooth, a yellowed page in a logbook, all still speak, softly. All remind us of lives suspended between sea and sky, of a world built on oil, salt, and silence. Not all stories end with thunder. Some fade gently, like a current slowing near shore, like Scrimshaw, quiet, precise, enduring, like a jawbone arch, standing alone on a tundra plain, like a melody once hummed aboard a rocking boat. The whale left behind more than oil. It left behind reflection. It left behind echoes. And though the ships are gone, and the sailors sleep beneath stone or wave, we still hear the sea whisper. While the average whaleman lived in the creaking belly of the ship, surviving off salt pork and hardtack, life for the whaling captain existed in a very different rhythm. Imagine yourself stepping into the captain's quarters, a cabin modest by today's standards, but spacious by maritime ones, paneled in dark wood, and filled with the soft scent of oilskin and wax. There was privacy here, a cot with proper bedding, a desk for keeping logs, perhaps even a book or two for the long nights at sea. A brass lamp might swing from the ceiling, casting its warm glow across navigational charts and meticulously kept ledgers. Here, decisions were made, not just about routes and wind, but profits, punishments, and the delicate balance of morale among the crew. A whaling captain was more than a sailor. He was a businessman, a leader, and in some ways, a politician. The success or failure of the voyage often rested on his shoulders alone. Back in Nantucket, or New Bedford, or Sag Harbor, his name might carry weight among merchants and investors. A single prosperous voyage could yield fortunes in whale oil and baleen, lifting a captain's family into a higher echelon of local society. Homes of successful captains were well appointed. Georgian architecture, fine china, imported wallpaper, bookshelves lined with volumes brought from port cities. Some owned pianos, luxuries carried back from Europe or the Caribbean. Their wives, many of whom were deeply involved in managing finances and households, hosted salons or supported abolitionist causes. They read widely, corresponded with merchants, and sometimes even tracked the position of their husband's ship using information from other voyages. A captain, returning from sea, might be greeted not only by family, but by investors, ready to assess his yield and plans for the next voyage. And yet, this elite standing came with its own isolation. Captains could be gone for years, 2, 3, even 5, depending on the hunt and the ocean's moods. Children were born while they were away. Parents passed. Houses changed. Some captains took their wives aboard on longer voyages, a practice that was rare but not unheard of. In these instances, a ship's social life shifted and new customs formed: tea taken in the afternoons, letters written with more care. Still, danger was never far. Even the most experienced captain could lose his ship to ice, illness, or an angry sea. And the whales themselves were unpredictable, massive, powerful, and at times vengeful. A moment's miscalculation could send a boat splintering into the waves. Despite this, some captains rose to fame, carving their names into the logbooks of maritime lore. Names like George Pollard, who twice faced disaster at sea, or Thomas Nickerson, who later recounted the Essex tragedy, became woven into the deeper history of whaling. In their refined parlors back on land, surrounded by oil lamps and velvet settees, they carried invisible scars: the choices made on deck, the lives saved or lost, stayed with them. Their voices at town meetings were calm and measured, but their eyes had seen the storms that bent the world. They had stared into the dark eye of the whale and lived to return. As the age of whaling waned in the late 19th century, so too did the status of these maritime elites. Steamships rose, petroleum emerged, and the oil of whales dimmed to a memory. Their houses remain silent, dignified, on quiet Nantucket streets. If you walk there today, you might see a brass telescope in a window, or a scrimshawed tooth on a mantelpiece, echoes of an era when power rode the waves and a man's fortune floated on the back of a whale. And so, the world of the whaling captain stands as a final counterpoint to the chaos and hardship below deck, a space of order, calculation, and quiet ambition, still tethered to the sea, but elevated, aloof, even, from the daily struggle of the men who made the captain's comfort possible. And in that contrast, we glimpse the structure of a floating society, complete with class, wealth, and dreams carved from ivory and oil. And so, as the last sails of the whaling era slip beneath the horizon, as the oil lamps fade and the scent of salt air drifts from memory, we leave the creaking hull of the ship behind. We step ashore again, this time not into the quiet affluence of Nantucket or the roar of the sea, but into the stillness of another kind of storm, a storm not of water, but of silence and breath, of waiting, of watching, of illness, moving invisibly through the air and over cobbled streets. Now, we walk not among sailors, but among the citizens of a plague-struck city, where the wind carries more than dust, and every closed door holds its own story. Prepare to step carefully, breathe quietly, and listen closely. This is what it was really like to live in a plague city. Take a moment to settle in, breathe gently, and let the noise of the modern world slip quietly into the distance. Tonight, we're not venturing to grand battles or glittering courts, nor to stormy seas or distant empires. Instead, we drift into something slower, something closer, a city, still, silent, and waiting. Imagine cobbled streets where footsteps echo more loudly than they should, windows shuttered, chimneys cold, the air thick with the scent of smoke, dust, and something else, something not quite named. This is not one plague, but many. London, Venice, Constantinople, Florence, Paris, different cities, different years, but the feeling, the rhythm, the weight of life within them, eerily familiar. Tonight, we will walk their alleys, sit inside their homes, watch from windows as carts roll by, and bells toll. In this episode, we will explore what it meant to live, to endure, to wait, during times when breath itself was a risk, when touch was rare and silence was a form of survival. We'll begin with the experience of an ordinary person during an outbreak, what you would see, smell, and feel in the rhythm of plague life. Then we will follow the story of one city's crisis, perhaps London or Florence, through the eyes of those who recorded it. Next, we'll drift into the strange world of plague doctors, quarantines, and burial practices, the mystery, the rituals, and the eerie beauty of how humans responded. And finally, we'll ascend for a moment into the world of the wealthy and powerful during plague times, the ones who fled, who feasted, who hid behind high walls, and hoped not to be touched. Together, we will walk through the rhythms of fear, routine, resilience, and silence. This is not a tale of panic, but of daily life, when life itself hung quietly in the air. So close your eyes if you'd like. Let your breath slow, and imagine what it was really like to live in a plague city. Imagine yourself waking to silence, not the peaceful silence of early morning in a countryside home, but a heavy, uncertain silence, like something has been forgotten or held just beyond the edge of hearing. You rise slowly, your body stiff from another night of restless sleep. The room around you is dim, sunlight filtered through oiled cloth or dusty shutters nailed shut from the outside. There is no rush to the day, because there is nowhere to go. The city is under watch, not the kind enforced by guards with swords, but something quieter. Signs chalked on doors, candles placed in windows, a bell perhaps, tolling every few hours, not for the time, but for the dead. You cross the room carefully. Every surface feels dusty, untouched. The hearth has gone cold, and kindling is scarce. Even if you had food to cook, the markets have been closed for weeks. You wrap a cloth around your mouth and nose. It does little, but it's something. The cloth smells of lavender, cloves, or vinegar, whatever you've tucked inside in, hopes it might protect you. You glance toward the window, but don't open it. Outside, the streets are too quiet. No carts, no children playing, no calls from merchants, just a black-robed figure in the distance, walking slowly, perhaps a physician or a collector, come to fetch the bodies. The door is barred, not to keep people out, but to keep the sickness in. Your neighbor's home, once filled with laughter, is silent now. Their shutters are closed, too. No one has seen them for 3 days. You boil water slowly, carefully, using the last of your firewood, a weak broth, if you're lucky, made from dried roots, a crust of bread, soaked until soft. Each bite is measured, each sip cautious. Outside, a bell rings again. You light a small candle. The wax is precious now, but its flame offers comfort, a reminder that the world is still turning, that the light still exists somewhere beyond the fear. Hours pass in stillness. You clean the floor with vinegar. You say prayers, perhaps. You watch the shadows move across the room as the day fades. There is no clear division between afternoon and evening anymore, just a soft dimming of everything. The walls, the air, the hope. At dusk, someone passes by. You hear their footsteps, a rare sound, and a low murmur of voices. Then the rattle of a cart, slow and unhurried. You don't look. You know what it means. When night finally falls, it brings a hush, deeper than before. Sleep is restless, dreams, vivid. You turn, listening to your own breathing, and hope it stays steady. This is life, not in the fevered moment of outbreak, but in the long, quiet days that follow, when everything is uncertain, when survival is routine, when the city feels more like a waiting room than a home. And so, you wait, and you breathe, and you listen to the silence that surrounds everything. Tomorrow, if it comes, will be much the same. Let us step back in time, not just into the general stillness of a plague city, but into one moment, one place. Florence. The year is 1348. The city, once bustling with art, commerce, and movement, now feels like a great stone vessel, beautiful on the outside, hollowed within. We know what it was like, not through rumor or faded memory, but because someone wrote it all down. A man named Giovanni Boccaccio, a writer, more famous for what came later, but here, simply an observer, watching, waiting, enduring. His account does not scream or shout. It records, with quiet sadness, the unraveling of life as it was known. He tells us that the plague arrived not suddenly, but like a whisper carried on the breeze. No one knew the exact day it began, only that, in time, there were more funerals and fewer weddings. Florence, in those days, was not a quiet place. Its streets rang with voices, merchants, poets, bankers, craftsmen. Now, only the wind and the sound of wheels on stone. Boccaccio describes the bodies, not in grotesque detail, but in number, stacked in churches, buried without ceremony, priests too ill to speak rites, families too afraid to stay near. Some people fled to the countryside, to villas far from the city walls. Others stayed, believing that solitude and moderation might preserve them. Still others chose the opposite, drinking, laughing, dancing through the streets, as if ignoring death might somehow delay it. The fabric of society thinned, courts closed, markets collapsed, neighbors no longer knocked on each other's doors. The dead outnumbered the living in some parishes. And yet, in this bleakness, Boccaccio writes not just of death, but of life continuing, quietly. Some tended gardens, some read or prayed or sat in long silent thought. And when the worst passed, when the pestilence finally moved on, it did not announce its departure. It simply faded, like mist burned away by the morning sun. But Florence had changed, forever. The survivors emerged into a city they barely recognized, a city whose rhythms would never fully return to their old patterns. And yet they lived, and wrote, and remembered. Boccaccio, years later, began writing stories again, not of the plague, but of laughter, wit, and mischief, as if to say, we endured this, and still, we are capable of joy. In the heart of silence, he had listened carefully, and in listening, he gave voice to those who might have vanished entirely into the stillness. Florence survived, changed, scarred, humbled, but alive. And now, centuries later, we listen too, not to the cries of the suffering, but to the whisper of their footsteps in empty streets, to the steady voice of a man who watched and quietly wrote it all down. Imagine the soft shuffle of leather boots against uneven stone. A figure moves slowly through the mist, dressed not in robes of healing, but in a long, waxed coat and gloves. A broad-brimmed hat shields his face from the weak sun, and where a human face should be, there is a mask. The mask is long-nosed, bird-like, pale and strange. Its empty eye sockets are covered in glass. Its beak curves forward, stuffed with herbs, meant to purify the air. You might see him from your window, never running, never hurrying. His presence signals death, or soon will. He does not touch the sick with bare hands. He carries a stick, long, pointed, distant, to lift sheets, to prod bodies, to signal instructions, without words. The plague doctor, as he's called now, was not always a true physician. Some were scholars, others charlatans. Many were simply the only ones willing to enter homes already touched by disease. Their role was as much symbolic as it was medical. They brought a sense of order to what felt like chaos, a ritual in the face of something unknowable, a shape that meant someone is here, someone sees. Beneath the mask, they might carry vinegar-soaked cloths, sometimes a Bible, sometimes a ledger to count the dying, name the dead. But medicine, as we know it, was not yet a science. Theories swirled. Bad air, divine punishment, planetary alignment. So, the doctors walked, observed, and recorded. They prescribed herbal pastes, bleeding or burnt incense. Often it made no difference. When death came, another ritual began. The bell, low, slow, and steady, a cart, drawn by hand or mule, creaked through narrow lanes. Its driver wore no mask, only resignation. Bodies were wrapped in cloth, if there was cloth, stacked, if there was space, buried in pits when churches grew too full. There were no eulogies, no graveside tears. The rites became mechanical. Words spoken quickly, or not at all. Earth shoveled hastily, then flattened again. And yet, even in despair, there were gestures of dignity. Families lit candles in windows for the departed. Some scribbled names on scraps of parchment, tied to wrists with twine. Others left rosemary, thyme, or laurel at doorways. A barrier, a farewell, a prayer. Gravediggers worked by moonlight. They hummed to themselves, their voices soft against the dark earth. It was a job with no glory, no recognition, but it kept the city from collapsing into ruin. In Venice, bodies were ferried by boat across still canals. In Paris, mass graves were blessed by trembling priests. In Constantinople, traditions blended, Christian, Muslim, and ancient. Each place had its own rhythm, each culture its own rituals, but all shared a common truth. To live through a plague was to live near death, always. And so the masks appeared, the herbs, the incense, the signs on the doors, all to make sense of the unseen, all to give the unknowable a shape. Today, those strange masks hang in museums, silent, eerie, misunderstood. But once, they walked the streets, not to heal, but to witness, not to save, but to mark the passing of time and the quiet resilience of those left behind. While city streets emptied and markets fell silent, there were those who did not remain behind tall gates and gilded doors, in villas tucked into distant hills or islands beyond reach. The wealthy, those with names, titles, and land, made other arrangements. They left early, some even before the sickness truly took hold. Whispers and letters had traveled faster than the plague itself, and wealth, always a door opener, now became a lifeboat. Imagine a caravan winding its way into the countryside, servants in livery, carriages with heavy trunks, baskets of preserved fruit, bolts of linen, jars of clean water. No haste, but quiet determination. These were not escapes born of panic, but of calculation. The city was no longer a haven of commerce or culture. It was a risk, a danger, a decaying hive. So the privileged did what they often had the power to do. They withdrew. In Florence, a group of young nobles, including Boccaccio, took refuge in a countryside estate. There they told each other stories, tales of lovers, fools, tricksters, in an effort to pass the days with something like levity. Those stories would later become the Decameron. In Venice, wealthy merchants sailed to private islands, where sea air was believed to be clean and untainted. They brought musicians, cooks, and physicians with them. They built little courts in exile. In France, the nobility sought castles far from towns. They tightened their circles. No visitors, no travel, just firelit halls, hunting grounds, and thick stone walls. But even behind strong walls, the fear remained. Servants were dismissed or confined. Letters were burned after reading. Food was left at gates, with coins scrubbed clean in vinegar. Some hired personal physicians. Others kept astrologers close, seeking favorable stars and hours. Prayers were whispered in private chapels, while outside, bells tolled ceaselessly for those who had no such refuge. And still, plague found its way in, sometimes through a stable hand, sometimes through a child's toy, returned from the city. The sickness did not care for walls or titles. Though it moved more slowly among the elite, it was not blind. When illness came to the villa or manor, it arrived as a betrayal. And then, as everywhere else, rooms were locked, names were whispered, and candles were lit one by one in darkened halls. But not all of the privileged hid. Some, out of duty, faith, or curiosity, remained within the city. They gave funds for food and burial. They opened parts of their estates to the sick. Historians record these exceptions, not because they were many, but because they were rare enough to notice. And when the plague receded, the elite returned, their homes cleaned, tapestries aired, silver polished. Yet they too had changed. Art began to reflect the fragility of life. Philosophy turned inward. Wealth still ruled, but now carried a shadow of doubt. In Florence, palaces bore frescoes of dancing skeletons. In France, nobles commissioned quiet chapels for the dead. In Venice, the rich built hospitals, sometimes beside their own estates, perhaps out of guilt, or fear, or remembrance. Behind the walls, they had waited, and in waiting, they saw that even marble cracks, even gold tarnishes, and that silence does not always mean safety. The city, in its own time, welcomed them back, not with fanfare, but with the steady return of footsteps, the smell of bread baking, the distant sound of a lute. Life resumed, altered, quieted, aware, and the walls, once sealed so tightly, opened once more. And now, as we drift away from the candlelit alleys and silent courtyards of the plague city, you might find yourself exhaling more deeply, grateful for the softness of your sheets, the quiet hum of the present, the gentle predictability of modern life. You've walked the streets of a city emptied by fear, peered from windows shrouded in cloth, watched the slow passage of plague doctors, and glimpsed the lives of those who endured, not in triumph, but in quiet persistence, from the cramped and flickering kitchens of the poor to the marble halls where the wealthy waited behind stone walls. The rhythm of life during plague was uneven, uncertain, yet still, it moved. It moved in the creak of a cart, bearing its solemn load, in the soft Latin of a hurried prayer, in the hush of a family lighting a candle, just one more, for someone now gone. And though the centuries have passed, the echoes remain, in ancient records, in skeletal remains, in the yellowed pages of diaries never meant to be read aloud. They tell us that people, much like us, breathed through days that felt endlessly gray, and still made soup, combed hair, told stories by firelight. Tonight, perhaps you feel the gentle weight of that continuity, the knowledge that you are connected, not just to great events, but to the small, enduring gestures of humanity that outlast them. So rest now. The bells have quieted. The windows are open again. The streets are swept clean. You are far from that time, but you've visited gently through thought and imagination, and now you may leave it behind. Close your eyes and let the hush of history lull you into sleep. The city fades, the night deepens, and stillness once again returns. Good night.